And we are live. That was rough for the Jazz. I was looking forward to. I knew the Knicks were looking better this year, but I thought the Jazz should easily beat the Knicks. I was looking forward to a happy episode where I could talk about the positives of the Jazz because, except the Spurs game, all of the post game reactions that I've done have been losses, and I've been very critical of the Jazz. And if you watch the Spurs post game reaction, I was very critical of the Jazz there as well, because even though it was a blowout, I didn't see much that I liked from the Jazz in that Spurs game. And then this Knicks game at halftime, I was feeling good because it was a double-digit lead, but just from the eye test, I knew that the Jazz could still lose it at halftime. The Jazz, I felt like there was just a couple slip ups from the Knicks that gave the Jazz that lead at halftime. The Jazz looked like the better team in the first half, but they didn't look like a dominant team in the first half. So I was still worried that the Jazz could let it slip, but I didn't think they would. I was still looking forward to a happy podcast talking about how great the Jazz did against the Knicks. But that third quarter was awful, followed by another awful fourth quarter. And so I'd like to walk through some of the stats that I was seeing because it's actually interesting what the stats tell us. So I'll be looking back and forth between screens. So excuse me if it looks a little weird. But looking at the team stats in the box score, the Jazz shot 40 for 91, which is 44% from the field. And they shot, if you round, 32% from three, and they took 44 threes. So they're 14 for 44, which isn't amazing, but it's not like it's awful. 32% for a team is a pretty average night in the NBA, it feels like. They only shot 11 free throws, shot 6 for 11, percentage like 55%. Not great, but at 6 for 11, like, need to fix it, but I don't think that's where they lost it. Actually, on offense, it wasn't like it was an awful night for the Jazz. They did okay. They could have done better. But I don't think offense is really where they lost it. I think it was on the defensive end, where they let the Knicks shoot 52%. The Knicks shot 4 less shots, but made 5 more. And so I don't know what happened on the defensive end for the Jazz. It's not like the Knicks beat them from 3. They made 6 less threes than the Jazz. They had several more free throws, but it wasn't enough to cover the deficit. So I was disappointed in Jazz here. Like, we came in talking about how the Jazz were returning to their defensive roots. They drafted defensive mindedly with picking up Azubuike. They brought back Derek Favors to come in and play that defensive backup center role to kind of run the floor as far as defensively in the post when Gobert was out. And we were talking about how great the Jazz bench was, which, to be fair, everyone on the Jazz bench was a positive as far as plus minus goes, and everyone in the starting lineup this game was a negative. So that's something interesting to look at. But we were also talking about how adding pieces like Derek Favors and how all the Jazz pieces, how they're all good together, but collectively, like before the season, we were like, oh, they're better than their collective parts. So far this season, they haven't looked that way, especially this game. You know Donovan Mitchell is great. He didn't look great tonight. You know Bojan can hit the threes. Like, he didn't really show up tonight as much as we would have hoped. So tonight, it really came down to the Jazz were less than their collective pieces, both on offense and defense, and the Knicks were more than their collective pieces. Let's talk a little bit about that second half. That Knicks team in the second half reminded me a little bit of that Spurs team last year that the Jazz couldn't get around. They weren't shooting a ton of threes. They were getting in the post. Like, they had a good pick and roll game. Mitchell Robinson had some huge athletic dunks. When I look at the box score, I was surprised he only scored 9 points. I thought he was doing a lot more from that eye test. And then they were just getting open mid-range shots left and right. And that was something that the Jazz couldn't stop against the Spurs last year. So they reminded me of that. Yeah, and then in the Jazz fought a little bit. You saw Donovan Mitchell right towards the end, those last 3 minutes. He made some good shots, but it just came down to like too little, too late. On offense, no one was aggressive enough the whole game. Mitchell, no one had more than 20 points. And then Austin Rivers came out of nowhere and he killed it those last few minutes. And maybe if that hadn't happened, the Jazz could have had a chance. Maybe brought it to overtime and then had a chance in overtime. But I feel like the Jazz have had on a lot of their losses. It's been a player like Austin Rivers, like Jay Crowder, where they're probably not the number one assignment on like that the Jazz are worrying about on the defensive end, but then they just go off. And you like a couple games you can say, okay, that happens. But if this keeps happening, like that's not acceptable for the player where he's streaky. And if that streaky player always goes off against the Jazz, what does that say about our defense? Um, so yeah, going back to those major points that I've been like hounding the Jazz on all season. Um, at the first quarter, they finished out strong. At the start of the first, they were slow. They still need to work on that start of the basketball game. Obviously, that's not what killed them. The finish is what killed them. Normally, they've been finishing strong, but not tonight. They gave up after 24 minutes of basketball. Other things, energy. Low energy kills us. We've been getting a lot of comments on our videos that the Jazz either need to play their young players because they'll have the energy, they're a little more athletic, or they need to make a trade, sign someone, figure out some way to get more athletic wings on the roster. Because right now we have Royce O'Neal, we have Yang, we have Ingles, and all of them are valuable pieces. None of them are very athletic, right? So, and especially when it's like O'Neal and Ingles are some of our main defensive pieces on the for that wing position, and if there's some of the slower players at those positions in the NBA, it's tough, especially when you're going against a team like the Knicks, who's a lot more athletic. They'll get that first step every time, and then that puts Rudy in a tough position where he has to step up to stop the drive, which then leaves the dunking position wide open for players like Randall and Mitchell tonight, who just ate all game long. So rough loss. I'm not going to. I'll try not to be too much more negative for the rest of the stream. Keep commenting. I'll try to cover your comments. Let me know what you thought from the game. Any questions that you have. But that's what I saw. The offense was subpar, but I'm blaming the defense on this one. And for a team that the Jazz, they hang their hat on the defensive end, that's disappointing. We need to see something better next game against the Bucks. So one question here: if this continues, do trades need to be made, or do you think they can figure it out? I don't know. That's a tough one because last year the Jazz hit a funk pretty early on. It was pretty similar to this. They would lose 2 or 3, then they would win 1, then they would lose another, then they'd win 1, then they'd lose 2, and then they'd win 1. And then they made a trade for Jordan Clarkson, and that was huge for them. That brought that defensive spark off the bench. I was talking about maybe getting some athletes, more athletic pieces. I don't know who's available on the trade market. If I were the Jazz, I know this team has had struggles in the past in the middle of the season, and they've been able to figure it out. So I wouldn't make a trade yet. If this continues for another 5 games, and I might only give it 5 games because this is a shorter season, then if I'm the GM, I'm at least looking for pieces that are available and seeing what I can move. Obviously, the Jazz, it's not like they have a ton of cap room. The roster's pretty full, so they were limited with the deals that they could make, but it's something to think about, something to look at. O'Neal, I have been bagging on him in the past because I feel like he just kind of disappears, but tonight he did make some good shots. Happy about that. What do I think about trying to get Wiggins? I don't like it. Wiggins, I think he I think he is underrated. People say he's bad. People like but he still puts up 20 points a game year after year. He's being paid too much for what he does, and I don't think he's the kind of player that if you bring him in, I'm sure he'd be fun. He might get us through some games in the season. But this Jazz team, we're really looking to make a deep run in the playoffs. I don't know if he'll give that to us, and I don't know if that's what we need. And I don't know how he'd fit on this roster. Um, in years past, when like Mitchell's second year, I forget what year he's at now, but so I guess last year maybe or the year before, I kind of compared Donovan Mitchell. Is he going to be Dwayne Wade or is he going to be Andrew Wiggins? Where I know Mitchell for the rest of his career, he's going to be a 20 plus point per game scorer, at least during his prime. But is he going to be the kind of player who can lead a team to the championship like Dwayne Wade was? Or is he going to be a kind of player where teams will want him as a second, probably a third option if they're trying for a championship? And I think he has a potential to be like a Dwayne Wade, but I don't like tonight he looked like Wiggins, and I think adding Wiggins onto the roster, I don't love that. It would be really tough to work out in a trade as well. With the Jazz would probably have to give up Conley, and I don't know what else they'd have to give up to make it worth it for the Warriors. Let's see. Trying to sign Hollis Jefferson, we'd have to get rid of a player for that. Because as I understand it, the team is pretty full, and I don't know how like the two-way contracts work out. So if they could send someone down to the G League, if that could work, I think he'd like. I don't know if it'd be worth it to have to get rid of any players on the roster, but he could add something that the Jazz don't have. At the same time, signing him, I'm sure he'd be on the end of the bench. I don't think he brings enough for us to make any major moves. Worth a shot, maybe. You'd have to move some stuff around there. But moving forward, what do you want to see out of the Jazz? Are you guys looking for any trades, or do you think they'll work it out? I've kind of been talking about that, and I went off on Wiggins, but what do you think? Just let me know in the chat. If it stays dead for a little bit, then we'll just turn the live stream off, and then we can keep comments going. And once the video is posted, after each live stream, just so you know, the live chat goes away. But then once a video is posted, and that happens almost immediately after I end the stream, we stay on for about another hour after the video is posted and just chat with anyone who wants to stay. So at the end of this live stream, if you want to keep chatting with us, do it in the comments of this video. The perfect wing, I haven't looked into it for so the question is, who do you think the perfect wing would be for the Jazz? I don't know who's available to fit in. Like, obviously he's not available, and it wouldn't even work this season. Every time I think about a perfect wing where you have a team like the Jazz, where they have an awesome core, but they just need like another piece or something to just boost them, you're looking, and I know this is asking a lot, you're probably going to do a double take, but you're looking for a player kind of like Klay Thompson. And obviously he's a superstar. There's not many players like them, but, and I have been saying athletic. He's not the most athletic, but I think he's almost more athletic than some of the players that we've got. Maybe an athletic version of Klay Thompson who can't shoot as well, but you want someone who is not ball dominant on offense, that can hit those shots. When it comes to the break, they can be there. They don't have to be the best on the break ever. They don't have to be Michael Jordan or Allen Iverson. They just have to be able to run the break. And when it comes to one-on-one defense, they need to be able to cover all-star caliber players without getting torched every night. Thinking around the league, there's not as many of those as I would like. And most of those players are signed on big contracts, even if they're not all-star caliber players, just because that's what you're looking for in the league. The tough part with asking for athleticism, though, is a lot of times with athletic players, you get either poor 3-point shooters or streaky shooters. And with the Jazz committing so much to Gobert, it's tough to have another main rotational player who's not another player like Gobert, as like with Derek Favors. It's tough to have one who can't really hit threes consistently. So it's tough to. I'll have to think about that. Maybe this Saturday, every Saturday we put out a video or two. I'll have to do some research and maybe we can talk about some wings. So if you're not subscribed, subscribe to the channel now, and then we'll make sure to talk about that in an episode when I can do some more research for that. Like Austin Rivers, I don't know if Austin Rivers is a wing. I think he's I think he plays shooting guard most of the time. I think he's small for shooting guard. I don't know if I'd like him here. He would be interesting with the bench unit. But right now it feels like the Jazz don't need more depth. It feels like they need like a player to either step up, or we need a star, because no one's really stepping up as a star in these games that we're losing. Yeah, I agree. Once Donovan and Bogey start performing consistently, the Jazz should look a lot better. That's the hope. That's what we're really hanging on right now for the Jazz. Is we know what Donovan Mitchell can be, and once he starts playing like he was in the playoffs, and then we're looking a lot better once Bogey is really out there and being himself again. The tough part, though, is the Jazz, their roster is a mix of young and old, and so the timetable with this current roster, how it's built, is kind of short. And there's a chance that Donovan Mitchell or Bojan don't perform like they do this season. Obviously, the hope is that they do, and for Donovan Mitchell, the expectation is that he will get there, probably sooner rather than later. But Bojan, coming off an injury, he might just be up and down this season. Cam Reddish, that's actually interesting. I like Cam Reddish, and recently there's been some great success by lots of players named Cam, a lot of them on the Suns. So I don't know if that's a name, or most definitely it's a coincidence, but I think he could fit. He might actually. That's a good one. I'll have to look more into that. We'll talk about it on Saturday, but I think that's one that the Jazz could actually make work. They might have to give up a little bit, sell a little bit of their future, but that could be a fun one. So tough loss to the Knicks. We should have beat them, but let's move forward. I think the Jazz have a better shot than most people are going to give them against the Bucks. The Bucks, they're a different team, but the Jazz have had good success against Giannis in the past. Obviously, you have to bring your A game, but a lot of time in the NBA, it's whichever team lost last kind of has the edge going into the next game, because they have something more to prove. So I'm hoping we see that from the Jazz next game against the Bucks. That would be great. But in the meantime, I don't want to dwell too much on the last two games. They've been rough. I think the Jazz are better than they've shown us, but I'm not going to commit to that until they show us how good they actually are. So everyone, thanks for tuning in. Again, we'll be in the comment section once the stream ends, and we can chat back and forth there. That'll be great. If you haven't liked the video, don't forget to like right now. Subscribe to the channel. We do a post-game reaction after every Jazz game, and then throughout the week we post, mainly on the weekends, but we try to get some in the week every now and then. We post more just overall what's going on with the Jazz and what's going on in the NBA and how that relates to the Jazz. We try to stay Jazz focused here on this channel. So if you haven't subscribe, like the video if you liked it. And if you want to keep chatting, just find this video once the stream has ended, and we'll keep chatting in the comments. But thanks for tuning in again, and we'll see you next time. Bye.